Devin Miles, a 16-year-old black teenager, had just left the electronics store in his neighborhood with a big smile on his face. Today he felt a special kind of joy because he had finally managed to buy a wonderful gift for his little sister, a brand new PlayStation 5. This gift was the result of months of hard work at his part-time job, saving every penny he could. Although the gaming console was more expensive than he could afford, Devin still wanted to give it to his sister, who had always been a huge source of encouragement in his life. Devin felt proud of himself. He wasn't someone who had many opportunities, but now he could finally bring home a great gift, one that he knew would make his sister incredibly happy. It was a small joy in the tough and sometimes lacking life of a young man living in a poor neighborhood, where items like the PlayStation 5 were often nothing more than a dream for families who couldn't afford them. He was walking home, passing through familiar streets with the PlayStation 5 box in hand, feeling happy as he imagined his sister's surprise. She's going to be so happy, he thought, walking faster with excitement in his heart. Devin didn't dwell much on the struggles he'd gone through. Today, he just wanted to enjoy the joy of a small accomplishment. Today, he felt like a normal person, not judged by his appearance or skin color. But in a world full of prejudice and discrimination, that joy wouldn't last long. As Devin passed a street corner, a white teenager, Nick Stone, suddenly stepped out from an alley. Nick, around 17 years old, was someone Devin recognized but didn't know well. However, Devin immediately sensed the tension in the air because Nick had been looking at him with a dismissive gaze since they crossed paths. Devin barely glanced at him before continuing on his way, but as he walked by, Nick suddenly shoved him, causing Devin to stumble and bump into him. The PlayStation 5 box nearly slipped from Devin's hands. "Give it to me," Nick shouted, his voice filled with aggression. Devin was stunned, unable to react quickly enough as Nick swiftly snatched the box from his hands. "You think you can steal from me?" Devin felt anger rising from deep inside, but he still tried to stay calm, not wanting to escalate things. "That's mine! What are you doing?" he protested, trying to grab the box back. Nick refused to let go, continuing to yell, "This guy's stealing from me! Give it back, or I'll call the cops!" At that moment, people began to stop and look. Some started whispering, unsure of what was going on. Devin continued to struggle, but the situation was quickly spiraling out of control. Nick was getting louder, and the crowd seemed to start believing his version of events. "Don't think you can take my stuff and get away with it!" Nick shouted, making Devin feel even more bewildered. People started pointing, and Devin felt like he was being judged, falsely accused with no way to explain himself. Devin couldn't believe what was happening. He never imagined that just a small accident would result in him being falsely accused and facing the ugliness of societal prejudice. Just when things were getting tense, Karen Brooks, a female officer from the area, appeared. Karen was a fairly well-known figure in the neighborhood, but no one really liked her. She was infamous for her racist actions and arrogant attitude, especially when dealing with black people. When she saw the situation unfolding, she immediately walked over without asking questions or trying to clarify what was going on. "Stop!" Karen ordered, her voice cold. She didn't even look at Devin. She only focused on Nick. "Did he steal from you?" Devin froze, not yet understanding what was happening. "No, I didn't do anything. That's mine. I bought it for my sister." Devin tried to explain, his voice tinged with worry, but Karen didn't listen. She immediately turned to Nick and asked, "Are you sure this isn't stolen from this guy?" Her question was filled with doubt not only towards Devin, but also showed clear bias in favor of Nick. Nick, now feeling supported by the police, believed he could do whatever he wanted. "Definitely, officer," Nick replied, smugly smiling. "This guy's always looking at me like I'm a thief. Take him to the station. He's definitely stolen my stuff." Devin began to feel scared. He tried to pull out the receipt from his pocket to prove his innocence, but when he showed it, Karen just looked at it with contempt. "Prove it," Karen sneered. "Do you think this receipt is going to help you? He's the thief. There's no debate." Devin couldn't believe his ears. He never imagined that a legitimate receipt could be so easily dismissed. And Karen's insulting words only made him feel more unjustly treated than ever. But Karen didn't stop there. She did something that Devin never could have imagined. She pulled a lighter from her jacket pocket and immediately set the receipt on fire. Despite Devin yelling out and trying to explain, Karen just looked at him coldly. "Don't think you can hide your crime with a piece of paper like that," Karen said, her voice full of defiance and scorn. "What do you think you can do with that receipt? Well, go ahead and wait." Devin's face hardened with anger, but there was nothing he could do except stand there, watching the receipt burn right in front of him. All he wanted now was to prove his innocence. But even though he had done the right thing, he still couldn't get any justice. Officer Karen didn't stop at burning Devin's receipt. She continued with her suspicious and disdainful attitude, making the tension in the air even thicker. Despite Devin's best efforts to explain, every word he said was dismissed as if it wasn't worth hearing. Devin stood there, feeling like the whole world was turning its back on him. People in the crowd began to whisper, but no one spoke up against Karen's actions. A few even looked down, as if they were agreeing with what Karen was doing. The judgmental stares made Devin feel more isolated than ever. Karen, showing no patience at all, turned to Nick, a white man standing beside her, and looked at him with approving eyes. "He doesn't have any right to own that PlayStation." "It's stolen," she confidently stated, with no doubt or second thought about whether she was wrong. Devin felt his throat tighten. He wanted to speak up, but every time he opened his mouth, Karen cut him off. "Stop with the excuses. I don't need to hear your defense," she said, her voice full of challenge and cruelty. "How are you going to explain this? That receipt is just scrap paper. I've already burned it." At this point, Devin didn't know what to do anymore. All his attempts to defend himself were being rejected. He saw the looks from the people around and knew that no one would stand up for him. They just looked at him as a criminal, someone to be suspected. Karen decided not only to continue her disrespect towards Devin, but also took things a step further. She started ordering Devin to stop and not leave until there was a clear explanation. "You're suspected of theft. I'm taking you to the station if you don't stop arguing," Karen said with an authoritative tone. Devin felt his body stiffen. He never imagined that he'd have to face such a situation, especially with the police. They were supposed to protect him, but now Karen had become his biggest enemy. He tried to calm himself down and said, "You can't do this. I can prove my innocence. I have legitimate documents. This is my stuff, bought with my own money." Devin just wanted to show all the evidence he had, but his words were still ignored. Karen continued to disregard him, not even bothering to look at him. At that moment, a strange scene occurred. A passerby unexpectedly stepped forward and said to Karen, "Are you sure you're arresting the right person?" However, Karen quickly waved them off, dismissing their comment, making Devin feel even more helpless. Nick, the one who had started this whole incident, stood on the side with a smug look on his face. He glanced at Devin, then turned to Karen and said, "Officer, I can clearly see he's the thief. I don't want to waste any more time with this." Devin felt a surge of anger rising in him. Everything he had done, every effort he had made to prove his innocence, was worthless in Karen and Nick's eyes. They had set up this whole story, and Devin, though innocent, was still forced to take the blame. Just as the situation was escalating, Tyler Hamilton, another police officer, arrived. Tyler was someone who had known Devin from previous interactions in the neighborhood. However, instead of standing with Devin, he immediately sided with Karen. "What's going on, Karen?" Tyler asked, looking at Devin with suspicion. Karen didn't waste time explaining. "He's stealing from Nick, and I need to take him to the station. We need to clear this up." Tyler nodded without a second thought and immediately instructed Devin to stop. "You're suspected of theft, and I'm ordering you not to leave." Devin, despite wanting to protest, knew he didn't have many options. A sense of helplessness overwhelmed him as he realized that the very people who were supposed to protect him were the ones oppressing him. The situation grew even more unfair when Karen started to unbuckle her handcuffs and ordered Tyler to take more severe action. "Take him away right now. No need for any further consideration," she said without hesitation. All of Devin's explanations, all his attempts at proving his innocence, were rejected. In Karen and Tyler's eyes, he was just a potential criminal, someone to be suspected because of his skin color. Karen's increasingly crude insults only made the oppression feel even more unbearable, and Devin, standing in front of this injustice, felt like he was being treated like an animal. When he could no longer bear it, Devin decided not to stay silent any longer. "What are you doing? I didn't do anything wrong. You're lying to me," Devin shouted, his voice filled with anger. But all his efforts were in vain. Karen turned back to look at him, sneering contemptuously. Shut up. No one here can help you. Everyone knows you're a criminal." Devin's anger began to boil over, but he tried to suppress it, not wanting to fall into the trap Karen had set. His mind focused on only one thing: how to prove his innocence before it was too late. The scene had become even more chaotic. Devin felt like everything was slipping out of his hands. Although he had tried his best to prove his innocence, his words seemed worthless in Karen and Tyler's eyes. They had already decided he was a criminal, and nothing could change that decision. Devin stood there, in the middle of the crowded street, feeling like an animal being hunted. There was no fairness, no chance to prove his innocence. Karen and Tyler had not only ignored his explanations, but had also decided to act with blatant bias and prejudice. The injustice he was enduring was not a mere coincidence. It was the result of deeply ingrained biases held by the people around him. Just when Devin felt utterly hopeless, a black police car pulled up to the crowd. The door swung open, and a tall man in a police uniform stepped out. This was Captain Lyle Jordan, a well-known police officer in the area, and most importantly, Devin's uncle. Lyle had raised Devin since he was young, and Devin had always felt a strong sense of protection from his uncle. However, today that protection became an unexpected turn of events. The moment Devin saw his uncle, it felt like a spark of hope ignited in his heart. "Uncle Lyle!" he called out, his voice filled with both hope and desperation. He rushed toward his uncle, wanting to be shielded from the oppression he was facing. Lyle immediately noticed his nephew standing there, handcuffed and unjustly treated, and walked straight toward him. Lyle's cold eyes locked onto Karen and Tyler, who had failed to listen to the truth and had acted based purely on bias and prejudice. "Karen, Tyler, can you explain yourselves?" Lyle said, his voice both serious and commanding. Karen wasn't flustered by Lyle's appearance, but Tyler's face betrayed a look of fear. As Karen started to explain, she stubbornly insisted that Devin was a thief, and that no further explanation was necessary. However, Lyle wasn't easily swayed. "Karen, I'm the police chief of this area. I've heard enough. Every action you take needs to have a reason, and you need to prove that you have the right to treat Devin like this." "I don't see any evidence that suggests he's a thief," Lyle said firmly, his eyes never leaving Karen. Karen immediately faltered, unable to say anything more. She tried to argue that Devin's actions seemed suspicious, but her words became weaker under Lyle's scrutiny. As Lyle stared at her, she could feel the weight of his authority. "You can't defend your nephew like that. He clearly stole from me," Karen attempted to say, but the firmness in Lyle's voice made her feel like her argument had no ground. Lyle turned back to Devin, noticing the worried look on his face. "Devin, tell me what happened," Lyle said gently, yet with enough warmth and trust in his voice that Devin could feel it. Devin took a deep breath, trying to calm himself after everything that had happened. He couldn't believe he was standing in front of Uncle Lyle, having to prove his innocence. He began to recount everything from the beginning, explaining how he had bought the PlayStation 5 for his sister and how he had been falsely accused of stealing simply because of his skin color. Lyle listened intently, not interrupting. When Devin finished, Lyle turned to Tyler and Karen. "As you can see, there is no evidence to suggest that Devin is a criminal. He bought that PlayStation 5 legally. Why are you treating him this way?" Tyler couldn't answer. Lyle continued, "This needs to be escalated to a higher level, but for now, I demand that you stop this immediately." While Lyle was speaking with Karen and Tyler, Devin remembered something important. His phone had been recording everything that had happened. He quickly pulled out his phone and played the video he had filmed from the moment Nick began accusing him. The video clearly showed Karen burning the receipt and the racist remarks she had made. Devin quickly handed his phone to Lyle, and he watched the video. Lyle scrutinized the video and shook his head. "This is important evidence, and this not only clears Devin's name, but also exposes your misconduct," Lyle said, staring directly at Karen and Tyler. His determination left both of them without a rebuttal. As the video ended, Karen couldn't ignore the pressure building on her. Everything she had done was now documented, and it was clear evidence against her racist actions. Karen began to feel uneasy, her face turning red with embarrassment. She could no longer defend herself. Lyle continued, "Karen, I'm reporting your actions to higher authorities. This is unacceptable behavior in the police force. I will demand an immediate investigation into what you've done and how you handled this case." Karen had nothing more to say. She knew she had lost this confrontation. Tyler, who had originally sided with Karen, finally realized that he could no longer support such wrongful actions. He looked at Lyle, then at Devin, and quietly stepped back. "I think I was wrong. I'll cooperate," Tyler said softly, but the anxiety in his voice couldn't be hidden. After Devin was rescued from the dangerous situation by Uncle Lyle's intervention, the tension in the air hadn't completely dissipated. Although Karen and Tyler had been exposed in front of Lyle, this didn't mean they easily accepted their defeat. Their pride and self-defense mentality made Karen and Tyler even more uncomfortable and unwilling to admit their mistakes. Devin stood there, facing Karen's defiant gaze. He could sense her defeat in her eyes, but at the same time, he could also see the bitterness and arrogance that hadn't left her. Even though the video had clearly proven his innocence, Karen still couldn't face the truth easily. Lyle stood between Devin and Karen, looking at her with a stern expression. "Karen, your actions today are unacceptable. You used your power to oppress an innocent person just because of their skin color. This is not how a police officer should carry out their duties." Karen, standing before Lyle, still couldn't admit her wrongdoings. "I was just doing my job. He looked suspicious. I did what was necessary to ensure safety," she said, her voice a bit hesitant, but still trying to defend her actions. "It's my job." Lyle shook his head. "Your job is to protect everyone, not to judge others based on their appearance. You let racism dictate your actions." Devin stood silently, watching Karen. Even though his Uncle Lyle was there, he couldn't help but feel a sense of injustice creeping into his heart. What Karen had done to him was all too clear. It wasn't the first time he had faced racial discrimination, but this time it felt like the most costly. Karen continued to refuse to acknowledge her wrongs. She turned back to Lyle with a resolute gaze, trying to defend her decision. "My job is to maintain order, and if I suspect someone, I have to act. I can't just stand by when I see someone like him walking around with a box or I don't know what it is." She glanced at Devin, her tone becoming mocking. "He looks like a thief." Devin felt a deep pain as he heard these words. Every sentence Karen said felt like a sharp stab to his heart, but he didn't let his emotions take over. He knew that he couldn't let racism destroy his faith in justice. "Karen," Lyle said, his voice calm but serious, "you are ignoring justice because of your prejudice. If you can't face the truth, you're not fit to wear the badge you're wearing. Yes, you're doing your job, but that job can't include making wrong decisions based on racism." Karen stood still, her hands clenched. She didn't want to admit her mistake, didn't want to face the reality that she had been wrong. But even if she couldn't face the truth, everyone around her could see her failure. As Karen continued to defend her stance, Tyler stood quietly, his eyes revealing confusion. He had followed Karen's lead without considering the situation carefully. He felt a sense of shame for his actions, and he was beginning to realize that what he had done was wrong. The feeling of guilt grew within him, and eventually Tyler walked toward Lyle. "I think I was wrong. I shouldn't have stood by Karen without thinking it through," Tyler said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I didn't see this situation clearly." Lyle nodded. "The important thing is recognizing your mistake, Tyler. That's the first step in correcting it." Devin looked at Tyler, a small sense of relief rising within him. Although it was just a small step, it was a sign of change. He realized that not everyone would continue holding on to their wrong beliefs forever. Tyler might not be perfect, but his willingness to acknowledge his mistake gave Devin a glimmer of hope. While Lyle continued speaking with Tyler, Karen stood still, her hands gripping the car bumper tightly. She couldn't accept that Lyle, her colleague, was publicly criticizing her. The feeling of being insulted caused Karen to lose her composure. Her eyes grew red with anger, and she couldn't hide the feeling of being threatened. "That's enough," Karen said, her voice firm. "I'm not going to stand here and be criticized. I'm doing my job, and I won't apologize." Lyle looked at her with determination. "Karen, if you continue behaving like this, I won't hesitate to report you to higher authorities. Don't think I'll let this behavior happen again." Eventually, Karen realized that she couldn't continue defending her actions, even though she still refused to admit her mistakes. Lyle turned back to Devin and looked at him with a reassuring glance. "Devin," Lyle said, "thank you for being patient. Justice will be served, and she will have to be held accountable for her actions." Devin nodded, though he still felt tense, but at least he knew the truth had been revealed and that, in the end, justice was on his side. After the truth was revealed and Karen was finally forced to face her mistakes, the atmosphere on the street slowly returned to calm. However, for Devin, this story was not just a simple confrontation that had come to an end. Although he had been rescued from the dangerous situation, the consequences and feelings of injustice he had endured still lingered in his heart. As Karen and Tyler left, the tension inside Devin didn't subside. He felt as though he had won a small victory, but he also realized that the fight for justice couldn't end with just one success. The system and deep-seated prejudices still existed, and he needed to continue fighting to ensure that no one else would have to endure the racial discrimination he had faced. Since the video Devin recorded began circulating on social media, his story had attracted widespread attention. Justice supporters started sharing the video, expressing outrage over Karen's actions and calling for change. Black rights organizations quickly spoke out, demanding that the police department investigate and take strict action against the incident. The video also caught the attention of journalists and reporters, making the case a hot topic in the community. People began participating in online discussions about racial discrimination in the police force and the role technology plays in exposing the truth. Devin followed the posts and reactions on social media, feeling a sense of comfort, knowing that not only was he standing up, but so were many others against racial discrimination. The encouragement and support made him feel less alone in this fight. As the attention from the community continued to grow, the police department began to feel pressure both from within and outside. Lyle, as the police chief, had called for an official investigation into Karen's actions. After reviewing the video and hearing reports from witnesses, the investigative team began taking the next steps. Karen, although not immediately arrested, was suspended from her duties and faced a serious investigation. Lyle not only demanded a thorough investigation, but also called for reforms in the way racial discrimination cases were handled within the police force. "This is the time for us to face this issue seriously," Lyle said at a press conference. "Racial discrimination cannot be accepted under any circumstances. The police are supposed to protect the community, and we cannot allow individuals like Karen to undermine the trust of the people." Karen's career, though not immediately terminated, had certainly been severely damaged. The investigation revealed numerous flaws in how she had handled previous cases. Many witnesses came forward about her racist attitude, and several interviews with colleagues disclosed that she frequently exhibited discriminatory behavior on the job. After being saved from injustice, Devin still couldn't fully relax. He sensed that although he had won a small victory, the larger fight had only just begun. Devin realized that his case was just one of many instances of racial discrimination and injustice that Black people face daily. He met with human rights organizations who approached him and encouraged him to continue fighting. Devin knew that he could do more to help others who faced racial discrimination have their voices heard. He decided to share his story, not just to seek justice for himself, but to call for systemic change and raise awareness about the injustice Black people endure. Devin began participating in workshops and community events where he shared his story and encouraged others to stand up against racism. He also connected with advocacy groups, hoping his efforts would help others avoid experiencing what he had gone through. Though Devin's story had been resolved at a certain point, his life could never go back to what it was. He continued to learn, grow, and work alongside like-minded individuals to reform the system. His story became a powerful lesson in courage and perseverance, a clear example that, even in the face of injustice, people can still fight for and find justice. As Devin sat with his family during a holiday gathering, he couldn't help but feel thankful for what he had and for those who had supported him throughout this difficult journey. And even though the wounds from the incident hadn't fully healed, Devin knew he was on the right path.